Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to, what's the date? It is September 21st, 2021, Goffstown Budget Committee. My name is Joe Alexander. I'm chairman of the committee. So we're going to start tonight with the pledge and then go from there. Fred, would you like to lead?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks for the warning.
All right, and so now we're going to get started with a roll call. Bill, would you like to start us out?
Bill Cordes, here.
Evelyn Redmond, here.
Stacy Belmore, here.
Richard Manzo, present.
Jared Talbot, School Board, present.
Fred Platt, Vice Chair, present.
Spencer Dias, present.
Lauren Dukas, present.
Skylar Sutton, present.
Mark LeMay, Select Board Rep, present.
Melanie Renfrew Hebert, present.
Awesome, and we're joined by Danielle Besora and Scott Gross from the school and town side. Great, so the next thing on the agenda is the approval of the April 20th, 2021 minutes. Has everybody had the opportunity to look over those minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, so I have a motion to approve and a motion to second. Because this is in person, we can just do a voice vote if that works. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Abstains?
Aye.
Evelyn Redmond abstains. The rest is unanimous. All right, so we're going to go into the committee meeting schedule review. So Fred and I met with Danielle, Scott, and Derek to talk about the budget committee schedule moving forward. So obviously we're going to need some presentations with different boards. So we've agreed to meet with the school board and select board to have joint presentations, allow them to have access to the budget first. But we were able to listen into that and ask any questions of the local officials. And then once they're done with the budget, they will hand that over to us. And then we'll have the opportunity to look for it and look through it line by line. Just making a note that Greg has just joined us right now. Hi, Greg.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
All good. So does anybody have anything they'd like to bring up about the meeting schedule? Does everyone have a copy of the schedule? Okay, so I believe we're starting school side to look over the school budget, and then we're transitioning into the town.
Yeah, we talked about an earlier start time. So what happened, I think last year, the school board had their normal start time at 6, and then they took a recess at 7, did a presentation. When Fred and Joe and myself, I could have sworn that we did talk about budget. We would just start at 6 with the budget committee and the presentations, and then hopefully we'll be done around 8-ish or so, and then the budget committee would then leave the meeting, and then the school board, if they have any, they will have other business to conduct, that they would just simply do that. So on both that Monday and that Wednesday, the meetings would start at 6 and hopefully conclude at around 8:30ish. So we're talking about October 4th, starting at 6 o'clock, which is the first Monday in October. Yep. And then Wednesday, October 6th, starting at 6 o'clock as well. Correct. And then then that's just going to be the presentations being presented to the school. Right.
So does there need to be a quorum present for that?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to send my apologies. I might not be able to make all those presentations. If you can't make it, just let us know ahead of time so we can make sure there's a quorum there for those. But if you can't make it, those will all be streamed on YouTube. You can watch those. If you miss something, you watch those another time as well. But the rest of them are going to be at 7. Is that correct?
As far as we have scheduled so far,
Okay.
yes.
Perfect. Are there any questions about the schedule?
That was just the 4th and the 6th?
Yep.
6 p.m.
So the thought is that we could hear the presentation on the school side of the budget, and then the school board would be so gracious to let us leave so we don't have to sit through the rest of the school board meeting.
But you can stay.
But you can if you want, but you can also view that online.
Sure.
Right. Awesome. Great. So we're going to go over to a discussion of the budget committee rules. Has everybody had the opportunity to review the rules of order for this year? I know I went over those in April, but I wanted to give everybody the opportunity to look over those. Are there any questions or comments about it?
Those are the ones that have a 2017 date, and we've adopted them ever since. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
We need to adopt them again?
We always have, yeah.
Yeah. So I move to adopt.
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
I mean, I would just mention that Robert's Rules is mentioned by name and we've never followed it, so we might want to just strike it.
We sort of do.
Not really. Anytime anyone's ever cited Robert's Rules here, eyes glaze over and we just don't bother.
So that's up to committee. Typically, don't we revert to Robert's rules if
We do,
the rules aren't specified here?
we do. But,
Okay.
I mean, we could move to a more, just simplified rule book, like Democratic Rules of Order, which is literally just motions and seconds.
I mean, that's up to the committee. So I mean, typically what is done, the only other committees I'm involved in the state level is that we revert to Robert's rules if there's not a rule specified, but
Okay,
we can continue doing that, and maybe the chairman has discretion over that kind of stuff.
yep,
And there's a new chairman, so maybe different discretion.
yeah, hopefully.
But if I'm stepping in as vice chair, I have no discretion.
No, I mean,
All right, any other comments about rules of order? Okay, so there's a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that was unanimous. Good.
One thing that you had asked to have on the agenda with the rules is discussion about the remote meeting participation.
Yep.
Did you want to take that up now?
Sure. So the next thing is regarding remote meeting. So because the governor's emergency order expired regarding COVID-19, there is really no mechanism for the committee to meet, a majority of the committee to meet remotely. The exceptions, I'm willing to grant exceptions in specific situations. I know there are members of this committee that I have accepted exceptions for already. But for the most part, we're going to conduct our meetings in person. I hope everybody's comfortable enough with that. And if you'd like, we can keep this distance wherever possible. And then anybody that is that would like to wear a mask is absolutely able to do that. Are there any questions about like remote participation? If you want an exception for a specific extenuating situation, please let me know.
And just if I could add as a reminder, when we do have somebody calling into the meeting, it'll be by telephone into this room. And on those meeting days, we will have to take roll call for all of the votes.
Perfect.
Mr. Chairman, I can hear barely. These things are meant for the video. They're not meant for broadcasting within the room. And frankly, this table separation is so big, I can barely hear the other end, so I would ask to speak up.
Okay.
We can do that. That work? Anything else regarding remote? Okay, great. So I'm going to pass the mic off to Scott Gross and Danielle Besora, who will talk about a little bit about the budget process, grant opportunities we've had, and a little bit of budget overview before we begin the season in earnest.
I'll start, sure. Welcome, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Scott Gross, and I'm the business administrator for SAU 19, which is Goffstown and New Boston. In speaking with Jared Talbot, who's the school board rep, Jared had asked at a prior school board meeting to provide the school board, and what happens oftentimes is you get this before the school board gets it, but which happens again. But so this, I created this for you, and I wanted this is it's a recap of what's called ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 grants. So in case you did not hear, both Goffstown and New Boston received grants from the federal government that were, the purpose is kind of twofold in nature. It is to address needs related to COVID-19, but it's also stimulus, or an effort for stimulus. So I know that some folks think, oh, how is this related to COVID? Part of the bills were to deal with COVID, and part of it was a stimulus type package. So with that, you have two grants. ESSER 2, Goffstown got a little over $1.1 million, and those funds are going to expire on September 30th, 2023. And as of right now, the school district has not allocated any of those funds in our grants management system. They are strongly contemplating, and we are in the process of doing it, is we're looking at, in this particular project, at our capital improvements plan, which has been, we've talked about some of these projects for a few years now. So window replacements is eligible for ESSER 2 funding, as well as door replacements. And right now, we're looking at a district-wide window replacement project. The one, if you've ever got, the one that's kind of the most, eye-catching is if you go to Maple Avenue, you'll see that those windows are rather old. They're over 40 years old. In terms of energy efficiency, they're not very good. There are portions of that building where the windows were replaced, but this would replace all of the ones that are older. There'd be similar Bartlett. We don't have there isn't as big of a scope there, because we did do some window replacements. Goffstown High School, mostly in the tech wing. And then also some of the windows at Mountain View Middle School are also on this plan. So in the green box there, these are rough numbers, obviously, because we have not done architectural drawings yet. We've not priced it yet, but suffice to say that this Windows project, could in all likelihood eat up that entire grant. And if it comes in lower, great, but I just don't know yet. I joke with Jared all the time. The strings attached, or what we have to do to ascertain these funds, is crazy. And I'm fine with it being on GTV. The federal government, what we have to do is nuts. We have to do like 5 times more work than if it was just us doing it locally with our own tax dollars.
Shocking.
So it's going to be a long road, to do this. And that's that. So I'm sorry, federal government, if I offended you. And all those of you who work for the federal government. ESSER, sorry, Scott. Okay. ESSER 3 is another grant that was awarded, and this one was, stimulus, a bit more stimulus oriented, but there are some stipulations in it. That one was a little over $2.5 million. Now this one expires a year later, September 30th, 2024. And I was going to say this, that I have some significant concerns as to whether we can spend this money on projects prior to 2023 or 2024. If we have continued supply chain issues trying to get materials and labor, this is going to be a challenge, because the school cannot just do projects like anytime they want. We only can do them in the summertime. So we'll see how this goes, and it might require contacting our Congress folks to say, hey, we need an extension on these things. But I think most of the people in my job are very concerned about meeting those deadlines. But on this one is $2.5 million, but this one has a little bit of a catch to it. 20% of this grant must be spent on student remediation, which is good. I mean, what they're basically saying is that we recognize that COVID-19 caused a disruption to the school system. It caused students who might have ordinarily had in-person instruction, they might have fallen behind. We know that in our districts, as well as the state and at the national level, that math took a hit. Believe it or not, reading, not so. It kind of stayed fairly fine, and I think maybe it's because folks maybe were reading to their kids more, or there was a better understanding of that. But on the math side of it, it took a little bit of a hit. So. So we have developed, the district has developed plans in terms of addressing this, and I'm going to go through some of those with you. So we have already allocated some of these funds over, I think it's over $560,000. But the first one is district-wide tutoring. So we have a fairly robust allocation for tutoring for students who need additional supports, and you can see all 60,000 there in the budget. And this is predominantly, we're offering this, these are teachers who are going to spend time with students nights or on weekends. A learning management system. This is, it's called Schoology. Some of you might have heard of another program at the university system called Canvas, and basically, I used Canvas when I was at UNH, but it's basically houses all of your lesson plans, any videos that might be there, homework assignments, grades, you name it. It's kind of a one-stop shopping for students and their parents and or guardians. So we feel that integration, that warehouse or clearinghouse of all of that is going to help, and we're using grant money for that. We have what's called a Dean of Remediation, and this is the person that is going to be the individual directly responsible for students and parents in terms of their remediation needs. So there are numbers of kids who need additional support outside of the traditional school day. This is the person who's going to be working with existing teachers, working with the tutors, and connecting those students, monitoring their progress, and we have put that into the grant. We have also funded a Bartlett a special education teacher in this grant, as well as an additional guidance counselor at Mountain View Middle School. I believe it's safe to say that COVID-19 has caused, mental health and guidance counselor needs in our schools. And at Mountain View, we felt that an additional guidance counselor was needed to have one for each grade. Right now, there is one guidance counselor for the 5th and 6th grade, and then one for the 7th and one for the 8th. Now we're going to have one guidance counselor for 5, one for 6, 1, 7, and 8. So that will help us deal with some of these social emotional issues that we're experiencing, and that is an issue. So if you talk to the folks who deal with discipline in our buildings, kids being out of school, et cetera, it's something that we deal with every day, and having that guidance support at Mountain View will help us, because we didn't have that before. We also, you'll see the next one it's called IXL Online Learning Platform. This is, these are additional licenses. Through another grant, we purchased, the bulk of it, and what that does, it provides even more online resources for parents and students. Supplemental Learning, where these are, some of you have probably heard about like Khan Academy, and there's different ones where these are online type resources. If you don't know how to do a particular, say, algebra problem, you can how to solve this type of problem and quadratic equations, and there will be lesson plans, from someone else kind of doing that. So we bought into that, and that's at K through 12, and that's a pretty robust platform, and we're training our teachers on it so that they know what's on there, but that's another resource for kids and parents to go to. So you can see that we've got a layered approach here. We got the tutoring, we have the Dean of Remediation, guidance. We do have we have needs for another special education teacher at Bartlett, so we did that. And then last but not least, were 2 district IT positions. With all the technology that we have in our schools and all of the technology that we dispersed in terms of laptops and Chromebooks, et cetera, we only had a couple of people that were responsible for all that. And when you're talking about all of the laptops and hardware that our staff has, and then on top of that, you're adding the carts, and we needed more people to act in the capacity of assisting our students and our staff with hardware and software issues, because they have been voluminous, and are, we use, the town has a really good help desk, and they have a ticketing system. We do too, to an extent, but it was like falling like way behind, where we couldn't even deploy a lot of our equipment. It was taking months to deploy laptops. So this will help, with that. So that will align us more. What you're going to see when you look at our budget is you're going to see some shifting from some schools. In this budget, we have lines in our district for IT now. So our IT director, our database manager, our IT people. It is all in one spot. Before it was like everywhere and no one kind of knew. Now you'll see decreases in some schools and it's all in district. So that being said, you'll see that we have a little under $2 million left in this ESSER fund that's been not allocated. So here are some of the things that we're looking at. It'll be a second year of that Bartlett special education teacher. We anticipate the need for ongoing tutoring. And then I started to look through our CIP, or what are some of the things that I thought might be eligible rather than putting in the budget. So the Bartlett Media Lab, our heating controls, Glen Lake door frames, anything related to windows and doors is ESSER eligible, so we figured that was in there. Air handler replacements, anything to do with air quality, ventilation, that's in there. Goffstown High School doors, we have been on a cycle of replacing doors, so we might be able to replace all of them using grants there. District portable radios is another one that is potential. I think it would be eligible. If we decided to put a storage addition on, and again, these are all hypothetical numbers, that would be eligible. And then the one that I wasn't sure, and now I just got refreshed numbers. There's been a lot of discussion about widening the road at Mountain View. I don't know if everybody has experienced that Fun Fest over there, but that project, I was on a call about 2 months ago. That would be ESSER eligible. It's dealing with the fact that more people are driving their kids to school, creating more traffic, et cetera, but that price is way more than $350. It's more like double that. Okay? So that's really, I wanted to kind of at least share that with you. The second sheet that I gave you were what are some of the allowable uses. So I took this from the federal guidance. And for the most part, anything construction related has to be approved by the state and federal government. So when I do this window project, I have to give them architectural preliminary drawings, a little bit of information, and then they say, yep, windows, you're good. And then from there, I have to get a whole lot more. And then they finally, then I have to get a historical, anybody on the historical commission here, whatever, I have to get historical approval. Yeah. Historical approval, because they have to look good if it's a historical district, so they have to sign off on it. And then when all's said and done, then you have to go out to bid and all that fun stuff. But this document here just pretty much explains what you can and what you can't do. For you in the budget committee, the one important thing is, can you spend it on things that you already have in your budget? The short answer is really you can't, because we have to what's called maintenance of effort, which is a special education term, and then maintenance of now it's called equity. And it all depends upon the schools that you have within your district. So I can tell you right now that Bartlett and I think the high school, they are considered, I'm not sure what the term is, it's not high poverty type school. It's all based upon your free and reduced lunch. If you don't show that your budget is higher every year, if it takes a dip, then you're in trouble with the feds. So, and that's how it works with special education. You have to show that you are not, the term is called supplanting grant dollars for what your budget would ordinarily, be in it. So, but I wanted to at least, and Jared knows this because we talk all the time. I wanted to at least show you that almost everything that we looked at from a capital perspective is on the CIP. We're not pulling anything wacky out here. It's been on CIP for the last 2-3 years or even longer, and it's been discussed at CIP meetings, and you've seen some of that. And I think that's the first place that we would typically go. So that was really it for, so the grants are a good thing. They're, obviously it's, what is it, 3.6 million. With that, it's just a ton of paperwork, and compliance. It's you would not believe the amount of compliance that we have to do. So you're allowed, when you get grants through the federal government, to take what's called an indirect cost for your administrative costs. We really haven't done that in the past, and I'm pretty sure that we're leaning towards taking the indirect costs on these grants and on our special ed grant, and then hiring a part-time person to help us navigate some of this stuff, because it is just a bear of work.
Thank you, Scott. Jared, you had something to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions, and they're mutually exclusive, so if I can ask both or one. The first would be, Scott, you mentioned that you are the financial person for SAU 19, which encompasses New Boston and Goffstown.
Yeah.
The prices that you've listed for data remediation, the MVMS guidance counselor, and 2 district IT positions, are those being funded by both Goffstown and New Boston?
No, just Goffstown.
And so why is Goffstown receiving the full brunt of that that expense?
You can ask the administration on that. I've shared the same effect. The issue here is New Boston can contribute towards that, but that's something you should bring up at your school board meeting.
Thank you. My follow-up question, again, mutually exclusive, is these positions that
And I will say, if I may, the guidance counselor position will be exclusively, that's a 5th or 6th grade, so there are no New Boston students impacted, but the dean of remediation, district-wide tutoring, the argument, again, on the dean of remediation piece, that person will service the whole shebang, you know, not just Goffstown kids. If they go to Goffstown High School, they're going to get that service.
Thank you. My follow-up question is, for these positions that are being grant funded, how would they be funded if they continue into following years? Would they be part of the regular budget, or would they have to be considered new expenditures in the budget and would
Sure.
then follow not under a default budget?
So you'll see that at this point in time, things are always subject to change, but at this point in time, some of these positions, we've already earmarked that second year of that Bartlett special education teacher, that will be grant funded in the following year. If we still need a dean of remediation in the following year, more than likely that will also be grant funded. In terms of your 2 district IT positions, that's grant funded this year. You're going to see those as part of a repurposing of 2 positions. So we are putting those in the budget for the FY23 school year. However, we are eliminating positions in order to do that. So we're repurposing positions that we have within the district. So does that hopefully, and then if those that would not, would then, if we still, let's just say this Mountain View guidance counselor would be a great example. If it was not put in the next year for the grant, then it would be part of the budget. And again, that would be new as part of your budget, not default, because this is not existing. So that would be a new position that would be vetted, obviously, by the school board, budget committee, et cetera. But that's how I would envision it happening.
Thank you.
Great. And just to kind of, I guess, follow up, clarify, most of these things that are added through this grant funding are not one-time expenses, specifically in the ESSER 3. They're like multi-year expenses. Like they're new positions. They're not like existing positions.
The dean of remediation is a brand-new position.
Okay.
That one I can tell you with certainty, that might have at most a 2-year shelf life. And pretty much I don't see that one, it's a short-term need. I've heard of no discussions about that being potentially in a budget down the road. The Bartlett special education teacher, that will be grant funded next year as well, but that might be one that might come back as a new position in a budget down the road, and as well as the Mountain View guidance counselor.
Okay.
If that were not grant funded next year, then that would also be part of a budget proposal as a new position. The 2 district IT positions, Mr. Chair, those will be part of your budget. You'll see that, but you're also going to see a repurposing, so that'll be part of the
Okay.
presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to start at basics. What's ESSER stand for?
Hold on, it's educational secondary, I don't know, I'll find it out for you, Fred, but I'm so used to hearing it, but it's basically to deal with coronavirus, emergency relief aid type of thing.
All right, I need to know, and I think the audience would like to know what these terms are. So if you can come back with it.
Sean, I'll give it to you in just a second.
Okay, and ARPA and LFRF.
Yeah.
The other subject was already touched on, because I had a question, how many of these are permanent, how many are temporary? Obviously, there's a mixed bag here.
Yeah.
So as we go through the budget, we'll explore that in greater detail. But they're just the basic terms, so the audience listening, all one of them, two of them, kidding, anybody listening would know, and I don't know either.
I do want to give a thanks to Scott for going through the whole grant process.
Yeah.
I think overall, like, it's a lot of work, and it's still going to continue to be a lot of work. So thank you, Scott, for all your work, and Danielle, and I know there's a couple other grants coming to us as well. So
Thank you.
Spencer.
ESSER stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund.
I knew that. Educational.
Thank you, Spencer.
Thank you. Okay.
And then there's also, but Fred, this was all part of the State House thing. Didn't you get that thing, like gopher and all that stuff?
Oh, yeah, we got our own acronyms up
Right.
here.
I'm going to quiz you next time.
Couldn't tell you now. Danielle, would you like to go?
Okay. On the town side, that's where you see the ARPA LFRF, and that stands for American Rescue Plan Act Local Fiscal Recovery Funds. And similar to the school, the town has received some funding for COVID relief and stimulus. Our process is different. We received half of the funds up front. Those funds are already in the bank, and then another disbursement will come in about a year, next summer. The funds that the town has access to are limited in a different capacity. So we are very restricted in what type of projects we can do. So we can't do a lot of the capital projects that Scott was referring to. So the town funds are primarily restricted to public health relief, responding to negative economic impacts of COVID, and then there are some infrastructure uses, but those are primarily limited to water and sewer as well as broadband infrastructure. So we can't necessarily look at our capital improvements plan and select some of the projects. Because of that, because we have different restrictions, we don't have the same pre-application process that the school does with the architectural plans.
Oh, you can help
Thank
me
goodness. But we do have a lot of our own reporting that we have to keep up with to make sure that the funds are being used appropriately. So at this point in time, the select board has not taken action to allocate any of those funds. They're still gathering information. The interim rule has been released. However, we've not yet seen the final rule from the federal government on how the funds can be used. So we've kind of started to brainstorm projects that could be qualifying using that interim rule. But we're just trying to wait until we get that final rule in place. And the select board has until December 31st of 2024 to use those funds.
How large is that grant?
The total funds at this point, $1.9 million. Roughly, it's rounded up a little bit. And there may be additional disbursements if other communities choose to return the funds or not use their full funds. They may redistribute later on.
So you've received around 850?
We received half,
Yeah, okay.
so
All right.
at this point.
That's wrong math. Great. Good.
I forgot, I was remiss, and I should have mentioned this, but the school district does have on its website a page that's kind of dedicated to ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. And I think next week we're going to be adding a feedback component to it. So whether it's any individual budget committee member, anybody in the community who might be listening, if you have ideas or suggestions as to how this money should be spent, please share them, with me or anyone who works in the school district. Again, we're going to put something up on the website to make it a little bit easier for people to add comments. What I had shared with you were potential uses for it, and that's just, but that the school board has discussed. But this is not the end-all and the be-all list, and certainly community members are free to share their input, and that is something that's part of the grant, is that that you do have that dialogue between groups like this, the general public, students, et cetera. So we do want to get as much feedback, as possible. And as you can see, while construction projects, we thought might be a natural fit, there might be some other things that you feel might be needed. So please share those with us.
One other question. Are these grants tied to bills that have passed Congress? Or is this something that's tied up in something that may or may not
This
happen?
has already passed.
Okay,
This
that's
has
what I-
already passed. Thank God, right?
Sure, there's going to be a lot more coming down that pipeline, but, all right. So, do we want to review the budget process a little bit for newer members? Would you like to go ahead and do that?
Sure. So for the budget process, we've kind of touched on it earlier this evening, but essentially, first you're going to see general presentations. Those are going to be the presentations from the department heads and administration for both groups, the town and the school. And then after those initial presentation, the budget's going to remain with the governing body for review. They're going to be able to ask questions, move things around in the budget based on what they feel they need. And then once they come to a final budget, the budget will move forward to the budget committee. At the time that it moves forward to the budget committee, you'll be holding regular meetings for deliberation of those budgets. We'll have representatives present at the meeting, usually Scott or myself, depending on if it's school or town budget. And then we'll also have department heads, town administrator, school superintendent, as needed. And during those deliberations, the budget committee usually asks questions. They can make motions to change the budget. And once a final budget is determined, the budget committee will let us know that they've completed their process, and then Scott and I take that information and we categorize it into what the state's Department of Revenue Administration requires for category groupings. And from there, the budget will be posted. There will be budget hearing in January, so you see that on your budget schedule. That hearing has to be conducted per state RSA, and that'll be an open hearing with the public for any input. And once the budget is finalized, the hearing's complete, the warrant's been posted, that's when the budgets will move forward to the town meeting in March. So that's kind of the general process.
Yeah, and one thing I definitely want to say with Danielle here and Derek is we're so fortunate that the town and the school, we talk at least 2 or 3 times a week. We had issues, Peterborough had their, that was a horrible issue. We talk all the time, and we learn from each other on a whole host of things, and we share resources like crazy between Parks and Rec and DPW, police, fire. We meet monthly with police and fire. We met weekly during COVID with police and fire. So we have a very, very good thing going on here in Goffstown. So that's one thing that I wanted to share. The other thing in conversations that Danielle and I have had, Danielle goes to New Hampshire Municipal Association meetings. Derek does as well. I go to, it's called NASBO, which is for school administrators. There's also a school administrator association. So one thing that we did last year as a good example, which then I learned was like, no, you shouldn't have done that, was, remember we took all those dollars out, we're like, oh, as long as we have one in the 4,000s and one in the 5,000s, we're good.
Yeah.
Well, they're like, nope, you need to have one for each category in your MS 27. So you'll see some more dollars pop up because that's what the DRA wants us to have. So, and on the town side, you might see some more dollars pop up in categories, because if you have to transfer funds into, for some reason that you might not even know about, you need that dollar there. So I just wanted to share that, because we took like 3 or 4 of those things out last year. So we learn every year, we bounce things off of each other. We learn something at a particular seminar, and it kind of translates to what we do with you folks.
Well, and part of our job in the budget committee is to evaluate independently the school budget and the town budget. We don't have to have the same budget. The school and the town can agree to some of our changes, or they can choose to go ahead with their own. Typically, we've come together and agreed on a lot of the issues, but just so the committee knows, we are allowed to make our own changes and put forward our own budget as well.
And the default budget, that remains with the governing body. So the governing body will prepare the default budget. It will be presented to the public as part of the process and to the budget committee at the normal hearings. So you'll see them, but the budget committee won't be able to alter those default budgets.
Scott, would you like to go over you brought up the budgeting and spending by category? It's on the agenda.
Gross budgeting.
The dollar signs.
It's okay. So we have to budget what's called on a gross appropriation basis. So on the school side, I'll give you one great example. We have what's called a special revenue account. We'll call it a grants account. Well, in prior years, we might have had like $1 million in federal grants for IDEA, which is for special education, as well as some other state grants, et cetera. But now with ESSER, I have to add what I think we're going to spend in ESSER grants in FY23. So let's just say that I use a number of $2 million, right? Well, that $2 million, so the total appropriation will go up $1 million. So it'll go from $1 million to $2 million, but then the revenue also correspondingly goes up. So there's no impact on the tax rate per se, but the dollar amount, goes up. And sometimes people are like, oh my God, they look at the warrant article and they're like, now we're over, hypothetically $50 million. We were only at 48 or 46. It's because you have to gross appropriate because you've got revenue coming on the backside. So whatever we have to collect, that has to show up as a gross appropriation, and then you show the corresponding revenues or offsets to get to your bottom line. But that's, whether that's the town or the school, that's our obligation, is to do that. And it'll be more pronounced this year on the school budget because I have to include more money for all these grants that we're getting. And I think I initially plugged in 2 million, so I doubled it. It might even be more. I have to do more of the legwork to see how much I think we're going to spend in FY23.
And some of those are one time, some of those are. Most of them they're funded this year, but then after.
Almost all of those are going to be one-timers.
Okay.
I mean, we get roughly $675,000 in special ed, IDEA federal monies, and those are fairly consistent from year to year. But the ones that I'm talking about, these are going to be like, we're going to have 2 or 3 years of these blips, and then they'll go away.
Okay. Go ahead.
So on the town side, similar to what Scott said, the gross appropriation for budgeting, you're going to see most commonly in things like vehicles, where we might have an offsetting revenue if there's a trade-in or a sale. If a vehicle costs $100,000, we have to say $100,000 on the budget, and then on the revenue side, we'll show if we think we're going to get $10,000 when we sell the old one. So together, the tax impact is less. But on the budget that you see, it has to be that total figure. And that goes for anything that has an offsetting revenue. Additionally, spending by category, a little bit different than the school side. We don't have to have as many single dollars on the town side because the DRA categories are more broad. For example, on the 737 form that the budget committee signs every year, there are categories such as highway and streets administration, highway and streets bridges. So those categories are a little bit more broad, and then under those categories you're going to have everything from wages and benefits all the way out to facility costs that are related to those broad categories. So our budget, when it comes in, our departments try to itemize as much as possible so it's easy to understand where the funds are allocated. But as things move around or may move around in the budget, it's a more broad category when the state looks at whether or not you have funds to spend.
And that's a good transition, unassigned fund balance.
Sure.
You go ahead and do that.
So unassigned fund balance and return of funds. So on the town side, there is an unassigned fund balance. That's a term that you'll see often. Unassigned fund balance is kind of a tricky thing. It's a snapshot in time as of the end of the year, and it encompasses a multitude of different things, including under expenditure of the current year's budget, any over collection of revenues. Say we anticipated a certain number coming in for motor vehicles and we just had more new cars registered than we expected, that would be an over collection of those revenues. And then in addition to those two, which are the big ones that people think of, there's also a figure that is part of the unassigned fund balance that encompasses monies that are due to the town within a certain time frame. So if we have taxes outstanding, for example, last year we had $1.5 million in taxes outstanding. That money shows up as part of the unassigned fund balance that could be spent by the governing body. The governing body cannot just use the unassigned fund balance at any time. If they want to utilize the unassigned fund balance, they basically have two courses of action. They can either use it to reduce taxes at tax rate setting, which happens in the fall, or they can put a warrant article before the voters specifically asking to use some of the unassigned fund balance for a specific purpose. So they can't just dip into it whenever they want. It has to go through one of those two options pretty much. And beyond that, the unassigned fund balance, really the message we want to make sure everybody knows is it's not just cash. So it's represented as a dollar figure, but it's not just sitting in the bank somewhere. The portion of it that is cash is very, very important because that's what we use for cash flow to make sure payroll and bills are paid, but also to make sure we fund the school. The school budget, as you'll see, is two times bigger, a little more than 2 times bigger than the town budget. And the school has to get those disbursements on an agreed schedule. And as Scott said, we work very closely together to make sure that we can time those accordingly. But essentially, the town has to collect the taxes for everything: the school, the town, the municipality, the county, the state, and then we have to disperse those as required. And if the school turns around and says, we need $3 million in this month, we have to get it to them whether or not the cash is in the bank.
Yeah.
So that unassigned fund balance allows for cash flow and can help us from having to go out and get tax anticipation notes, which would essentially be a loan against future taxes that the taxpayers then have to pay an interest on whether or not that was planned. So we do our best to try and manage cash flow, and we use that unassigned fund balance to help with that. But just know that it is not a cash figure. And then the other thing is return of funds. So at the end of the year, when it comes to tax rate setting, again, the select board can choose to utilize funds to help reduce the tax rate on the town side. And likewise, the school has a process with return funds.
Yeah, so you'll recall that the school adopted what's called a 2.5% contingency fund. Smartly, the legislature, they changed the legislation last year. Now it's called a 5% fund, but that's something that last year the school board did not proceed putting on the warrant. I'm going to recommend that they do it this coming year. It's a smart move because it allows you to retain more of that fund balance for emergency-related purposes. So, in my opinion, it'll allow you to budget a little bit tighter, because if you, in the past, like if you have a special education student, and let's just say it's a $200,000 out-of-district placement, you're almost panicky. But if you, by having these types of funds, then you hold a public hearing. This is the purpose. You get public input, and you don't have to go to the Department of Ed anymore. This is the stated purpose, and it gives you a whole lot more flexibility in terms of managing your budget, managing for unanticipated, like, emergency type. We had this whole thing with the floors were popping left and right here. And it also, most importantly, it's a tool for the tax rate, because the primary purposes are for emergency expenditures, but more importantly, to reduce the tax rate. So one of the things that I know that the select board probably doesn't get as much credit for as that they should, is that they do a really good job trying to maintain a stable tax rate, not having it look like an EKG. When we had that $10 million issue a few years ago, school tax rate, like, went here, boom, like that, and then back like that. That's not good for folks' escrow accounts, for budgeting. It's really, really bad. On the flip side, the town has a bit more flexibility with managing that tax rate, but theirs is a lot steadier. When you look at the school, it's, in the last few years, it was like down here, then boop, tick, tick, tick. By having that fund, I think you're going to be able to stabilize it, a little bit more. So that's just my, my opinion. If you look at the last couple of years, due to COVID, we have projected tax rate increases, of, like, say 75 cents or $1. They're coming in way, way lower than that due to what you had said, that confluence of underspend of budget, over collection of unanticipated revenue through grants, et cetera. So that's all good for this time being with COVID and all these monies coming in. But we have to be mindful of down the road, and we have to kind of think, you know, conservatively in terms of making sure we don't have revenue cliffs, you know, and that's something that I pay particular attention to make sure that we don't have that. So we try to stabilize our expenses, our revenues, and tax rate, and all those things. So when I do your budget presentations, I'm going to talk about that. That contingency fund is a means in which you can stabilize, help with the tax rate piece. So that's my
Jared, you have-
soapbox on that one.
Thank you. Jared, you have something to add?
Yeah, no, more of a question. Scott, you mentioned something about the contingency fund. It is the budget committee's experience that anything that was going to be used for a contingency fund had to be first approved by the school board, then brought to the budget committee and approved by the budget committee, then go to the state for their approval in order to use a contingency fund. You're saying that process has changed?
The law changed, yeah.
And your understanding that the law is now what? For how that money would be?
It's my understanding that the school
approved.
board has to hold a public hearing. In my opinion, I would think that this is just me, this is nothing in the statute, but I think it would be a very good policy to be discussing with our budget committee in terms of that. But there is no pre-requirement that you have to go before the budget committee and you also have the state Board of Ed or the commissioner also sign off on it. That was taken out of the language.
So Jared and Scott, can you both make a point too at the meeting? Just clarify what you want that process to be just for Goffstown or New Boston specifically, just so we can understand, like,
Sure.
if there's going to be a use of the contingency fund,
Honestly,
what it's going to
I'm
look
saying
like.
this here, the board, I've talked to individual board members about it. It hasn't really been discussed at a school board meeting. I do plan on recommending that they pursue it because it has so many good benefits to it. If they do, Joe, then most definitely it's going to come before you anyway. But I'll get you that information.
My concern is just it's a double of what has traditionally been kept.
It's a double of an allowance. It doesn't
Right.
necessarily mean that the school board would put that in there.
Right.
And I would not recommend that they would put that full amount in there, but it allows them the ability to incrementally, if they have a year in which they had a very large over collection of revenue or an underspend, that you might want to put more in that given year. And then there might be other years where things did not work out so well and now you want to withdraw more. It's a really good tool, but it's set at that 5% parameter. It doesn't mean that you're going to automatically put $1.3 million into it.
So I'm just going to give Evelyn.
Or reserve 1.3.
Scott, what is that 5% based on?
It's, based upon your local assessed valuation. So whatever the local portion of your taxes that the town, so it's like 20-something million dollars. I'd have to look it up, but it's like 20, don't quote me on it, 20.
So your 5%, the school district's 5% is based on the local valuation.
The school's local share, yeah. Including swept, which is money that is, it's called a statewide property tax, but it's money that's actually taxed locally, raised locally, and kept locally. It's kind of a show game, but
Way to fund government. Way to
What?
fund our schools, right?
hey, whatever you want to do.
Okay, Jared.
Well, let me ask this question differently, Scott.
Yeah.
Whatever money the school board looks to put in this contingency fund.
Yeah.
Would that number be included in the gross appropriations that would go into the warrant article?
No.
So-
It is separate. So remember at the end of the school year, Jared, the board says, hey, how much do we want to put in? Now, keeping in mind that, say, last year, and again, please don't quote me on these numbers, it was something like, say, $650,000, and because that local assessment went up a little bit, you were allowed to put in another like $20,000. At every single year, that amount of money liquidates. You're just reserving it. It's a reserve amount. And then if you do not reserve it again, it automatically liquidates, goes to tax relief.
make sure I understand this. A few years ago, any amounts appropriated for school that weren't spent, you'd have to give immediately back to the town.
That's
to-
correct.
To reduce taxes. Now you've got a percentage, was 2.5, now 5, that you can retain, but it can only be spent for emergency purposes. So if there's
Or tax relief.
for tax relief, well,
Right.
but I'm going to focus on emergency purposes.
Yeah.
Because if you don't spend it for emergency purposes, it does go to tax relief. It does go back to the town. Is that right?
No, what you would be
Yes.
doing is,
Yes.
you would be,
Yes.
you're retaining it.
No, you're giving it back to the town, but that year you can retain a net new portion.
Yes.
Understood. But eventually it goes back to the town to
Correct.
reduce taxes. So nothing's being kept aside here in the net, except for emergency purposes.
Correct, that's true, yeah.
Timing may be different because of the law, but it eventually goes back to the taxpayer. Thank you. Yes.
So on the town side, I know it's a lot of information coming at you, but just to kind of give the comparison, because it's good when we're both here to be able to see kind of one side and the other, the yin and the yang. But for the town side, we don't have a contingency fund or an allowance for a contingency fund. The only type of spending that can occur from the town are established accounts. So if we have a special revenue fund that's been established at town meeting by the voters, deposits into capital reserve funds, things of that nature. You're probably familiar with requests to deposit money into the fire capital reserve fund for the fire apparatus. Those go on the ballot every year. As far as emergency spending goes, the town can only move monies within their appropriated budget. And if they need money beyond that, they have to actually go to the court system and ask the Superior Court for permission to spend beyond their budget. So it's very different in how we operate, even though there is funds available for tax relief. It's very different in how they can be used.
So let me ask, what's the unreserved fund balance or unassigned fund balance for the town side right now?
I will have to actually get
Roughly?
you a new number because that's a number that gets calculated by the auditors, and they're still finishing up the 2020 audit. But I can tell you just on a large scope, if we go with last year's, it was about 7 million.
And is that, how much higher is that than the DRA, like the state recommendation? Because if I remember right,
The budget
there is
committee, or I'm
a
sorry,
chunk, it's a chunk higher.
The school, I'm just saying anything. Select board, it's getting late. The select board has a target of 8%, and the DRA limit is a minimum of 5% up to 15%. So the select
Okay.
board's kind of in the middle. However, I have had some concerns about cash flow being at that point. So I may be bringing some information to the select board to see if they want to adjust that goal a little bit, just for that purpose. But we were at about 7 million last time we did the calculation, and they're currently recalculating now.
And on the town side, like, they have to be concerned about if you have, like, say, God forbid, an economic downturn and people are not paying their taxes and they're willing to pay the penalty, they still have to meet payroll. They still have to pay all the bills. So, you know.
For the school as well.
For the school. So it is, like, super critical, more so on the town side, that they have a robust and a good fair amount of money, because I need, like, I'm asking for like $3 million a month practically.
Yeah.
And then if, so, like, again, under normal times, it's generally not an issue, but, you know, I think it was like 2008 where there was a lot of folks that were saying, hey, I can't afford to pay my taxes right now, and they're paying a pretty high penalty for it, but they have, 3 years in which to do that, and the town is kind of still fronting all of this. And then I remember discussions about, oh my God, will we need, to take a loan to do all of this, simply because of that. So I think the unassigned fund balance, having a decent minimum is really important.
Okay. So I think the last thing on our agenda before we go to town and school updates is to just chat a little bit about labor contracts. I know those are outside the typical budget process that we just opened up. I believe the labor contracts for town and school side, they deal with those first, and then they'll present them to us. Usually it would be Danielle and Scott probably, and probably a union rep would come in or something like that.
Usually the union
present to
rep
us.
doesn't. It's usually Jared.
We'll
Or
have
the
Kate
school, the
McGrath,
HR,
who's
Kate,
the
that's
HR.
right.
Yeah, Kate
Right.
might.
Would come in and talk about it. a little
She'll
bit.
talk about that. So, Mr. Chair, the school board is currently negotiating a contract for our teachers. Our 3-year contract will be coming up. So we are looking at having a warrant article come out in March that would be a net new contract for our teachers. Whether that's going to be 2, 3, 5 years, again, that is still being negotiated. We probably won't deliver that to this budget committee until probably the early December timeframe. So kind of as we're putting our schedules together, we're looking at doing, the school presentation, the school budgets first, and probably the towns next, or whatever the groups want to do. But we probably will finish with the school budget, go to the town budget, and then come back to at least look at the teachers' contracts for that warrant article. So that will be coming up.
What's on the town side?
On the town side, we are negotiating a contract for the firefighters. Again, it's a 3-year contract that's coming to term. And so we are currently in discussions with them, and we would present that information once it's available. Just to give you an idea, the cost deadlines per state RSA is January 11th this year. We are hoping, because that is the same day as the budget committee hearing, we are hoping to be done in December. But we're going to do our best to communicate throughout the process and see if we can't schedule maybe one budget committee meeting in December, maybe later in the month, where we could present both the school and the town CBA, rather than making you guys come back again and again. But we'll have to kind of see as the process unfolds if we're able to do that. So we'll keep in touch with the chair for scheduling that meeting.
Perfect. So I do like to, at the end of the meetings, at least get an update from the town and the school side. We have 2 reps here. Just kind of let us know what's going on in town and in the schools, and if there's anything we should know about. Jared, you like to start?
Okay, let's do rock, paper, scissors. Who's going to go first? From the school side, so Scott already talked about some of our work as it relates to the ESSER and the grants. We did a very comprehensive study with the return of our students in the school system. We are back 5 days a week. Things are going very well. We are giving regular updates on our numbers at our school board, which is the first and third Mondays of the month. I welcome anybody to come to them. As Scott mentioned, and I do want to reiterate, one of the testing initiatives that we found is that we are being deficient in math. COVID definitely had an impact on our math skills. So that's why you're seeing these remediation, Dean coming in. We are trying to really get those scores up for our students. We want to get them back on track for their professional growth, whether they're going into a tech field, going to college, going into the military, doing what they want to do. But it's important to us to make sure that we get them where they need to be. We did identify them lacking in math, so we're trying to really put an effort into that. As we've talked about with our contracts, we have started the process. We'll continue that process as best we can, and we'll bring that before the budget committee. And we are looking forward to a hopefully very good budget season coming up. I thought last year with seeing everybody on the computer screens, or
You're on mute.
I'm in mute. Yeah. Gotta get off.
Fred,
mute.
you're on mute.
Yeah. Meeting people in the SAU. I'm looking forward to having everybody back so that we can have those honest conversations together.
Thank you. And just to echo that, I feel like it was a lot harder to debate and really get to the bottom of some of these budget things over Zoom. So I'm excited to be back in person too. Mark?
As far as the town side, you just heard, we've got the fire contract that's underway. They're working on that. One of the big issues we have, I kind of consider it a safety issue. It's a very important safety issue for the town, for the police and fire and everybody else that's involved with the radio system. Currently, our radio system is on the verge of failure. The system itself, if you could listen to the radio system every day, there's something that goes wrong with it every day. We had a study done. We had somebody come in and look at the system, and he basically said, try to get it fixed or repaired as soon as possible. Now we talk about the fix or the repair. The fix could be a $1 million plus fix for the new radio system, depending on what we get, depending what has to be done. I mean, this is something, I sat with the police chief this afternoon. This is life safety. These are our police officers that are out on the road every day, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. If they're on the backside of the mountain, they're in east parts of Goffstown, they sometimes will not hear the radio. They don't get the two parts of the conversation. And then they basically have to send somebody out to check to make sure that the person's all right. Likewise with fire, and Chief Allard can echo anything he'd like after. I mean, they run a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week system that is critical. If somebody is stuck in a building, let's say we have a mayday in the building, that mayday doesn't get transmitted to the correct people, whether it be the chief on scene or dispatch or whoever is in charge of that mayday. You could have a very tragic, catastrophic ending because the radio didn't work. As you know, I spent many years in the fire service, and my heart is in the business that we're in now, but we need to make sure that, like the school, not picking on the school always gets the best, and the school does usually have the best. I would hope that we here as a group would think of giving nothing but the best to the fire service, so that when a police officer is in trouble, he can communicate with his other brothers and sisters that he or she needs help, or the fire service, if somebody's in a building, the second floor collapse or the first floor collapse into the basement, that they can get that firefighter out as quick as possible. I won't say that it'll never happen. It can happen anytime. I have a pager, and I hear something every day of a firefighter dying, whether it's in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island. People, the fire service is a very tough job. So I think we here as the budget committee this year will have a very tough job to try to find the money or get the money started for the police and fire, so that we can, when our guys go to work every day, they'll have something that's dependable. I listen to the fire, I listen to the police, and it's so frustrating for somebody to repeat a message 3 or 4 times. When you're in the police service and fire service, that should not happen. And I'm sure the chief could, again, back me up on that or echo any thoughts that he has, but I think this will be a priority for us. I know they're in the process of putting the RFP together. At some point in time, I believe you're going to bring it to the board, right, Chief? It'll come to this board. It's like a 35-page RFP. It's huge, but we can have one little incident now with the system we have now, and we're putting 4 or 5 towns in jeopardy because of the system, the way it's designed. But the rest of the town is going good. DPW is good. Some new apparatus and new machinery's coming in. We're paving a lot of the roads. We're getting a lot of things done. I don't know if this Sunday, depending on the rain, we're looking at our first football game down at the new stadiums down there. You all come out and join us. It'd be an exciting thing. Everything seems to be going good. We're all working diligently with the budget. Derek and everybody else involved, we work good together. It's just, hopefully, it'll be a good year for the budget. Knock on wood. That being said, any questions?
Awesome. Jared?
Just as a question, and this is a general question maybe to the administration. I know during CIP, for the specific issue that was just raised about the radios, they budgeted $500,000 for year 1, 2, and 3. With the funds that we have for ARPA, is there the ability to use those grants specifically for the tower so that we can accelerate that work if needed?
So we are exploring all grant opportunities that may be viable for this particular project so that we can try and accelerate it rather than phase it out. Right now, we know that there are some federal funds potentially available that we could apply for that are specific to public safety. And so we're exploring that. There is hopefully a portion of the ARPA funds in the form of perhaps lost revenue or some other specific avenues that we could explore. That's part of waiting for that final interim rule to be released so we can confirm exactly how much of the ARPA funds may be eligible for this purpose.
Thank you.
Good question. All right, Lauren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark, just to clarify, and pardon my ignorance, do both the fire and the police run on the same system? Or are we talking about replacing an entire tower system for both emergency services?
We are talking about replacing the entire system for police and fire, and correct me if I'm wrong, DPW as well. Everybody in town will be on this new system, will be able to communicate. If there's a catastrophe of great, concerns, we'll all be able to talk together.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Is there anything else, new business, anybody on the committee want to bring something up right now? No? Okay, I'll take a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Richard,
Second, Evelyn?
second by Evelyn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Because